In the Australian outback, there's a fence longer than the Great Wall of China, 3,488 miles of steel wire cutting through red desert. The government says it keeps dingoes away from sheep. But if that's all it does, then why do 3 scientists refuse to sleep in the dark anymore? St. Vincent's Hospital, Sydney, March 15th, 2024, room 307. 3 people sit on the floor, backs against the wall, staring at the door. Not at the window, not at the ceiling, always the door. Dr. Sarah Mitchell traces the same symbol on the floor tiles, over and over with her finger. A circle with a line through it. She's drawn it 6,000 times in the past 2 days. The nurses have stopped cleaning it off. Marcus Chen counts under his breath. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. He's counting the people in the room, making sure the number doesn't change. And David Reeves films everything on his phone, even though the battery died yesterday. He holds it up anyway, recording nothing, because he says if he stops, they'll know he's not watching anymore. These aren't random patients. 3 weeks ago, they were part of a 4-person research team investigating seismic anomalies near the dingo fence. The 4th member, Dr. James Richardson, is gone, not dead, not missing, gone. There's a difference according to the 3 survivors, though they won't explain what it means. His equipment was found scattered across half a mile of desert, cameras destroyed, hard drives removed with surgical precision, and in the sand, footprints leading to the fence and stopping, just stopping, as if he stepped through solid steel and vanished. 2 days before he disappeared, Richardson sent a 6-word message to a colleague. "Don't let them know we saw." The colleague reported it to authorities. Within 4 hours, men in unmarked vehicles arrived at her home. Her computers were seized. Her phones were taken. She was made to sign documents she wasn't allowed to read. When she asked what was happening, they told her Dr. Richardson never existed. When she showed them emails, photographs, years of correspondence, they told her memory is a fragile thing. Here's what makes this different from every other missing person case in the outback. The 3 survivors weren't found wandering, dehydrated, and confused. They walked into Alice Springs Police Station exactly 72 hours after Richardson vanished, fully supplied, perfectly hydrated, with every piece of equipment except their cameras. They requested immediate psychiatric evaluation. They refused to be separated. And when the intake officer asked what happened, Sarah Mitchell looked directly at the security camera and said, "We crossed the fence. We saw what's on the other side. And now it knows we're here." The footage from that police station was classified within hours. The officer who heard her statement was transferred to a desk job in Perth. The town of Alice Springs, where everyone knows everyone, suddenly can't remember 4 researchers ever passing through. But 3 people remain in that hospital room, drawing symbols, counting bodies, and recording silence. 3 people who had everything to lose and nothing to gain from making this up. This is their story, and it starts with a simple question nobody in power wants answered. The dingo fence is the longest fence on Earth. It's supposed to keep animals out. So, why are there locks on the inside? The psychiatric ward at St. Vincent's Hospital wasn't designed for cases like this. Room 307 is meant for standard evaluations, 72-hour holds, patients who need a few days of observation before returning to normal life. But the 3 people inside haven't slept lying down since they arrived. They sit with their backs against the wall, facing the door, never the window. Hospital protocol demands they be separated for individual assessment. When staff tried to move Sarah Mitchell to another room, she screamed until her vocal cords bled. Marcus Chen barricaded himself in a supply closet. David Reeves simply said that separation is how it starts, and if the hospital forced the issue, what happened to Richardson would happen to all of them. The staff decided room 307 was fine. Dr. Richard Yamamoto has 23 years of experience in trauma psychology. He's evaluated soldiers with PTSD, survivors of terrorist attacks, witnesses to things that never made the news. On March 16th, he sits down across from 3 highly credentialed researchers and asks a simple opening question. "Tell me what happened out there." Sarah Mitchell looks at Marcus Chen. Marcus looks at David Reeves. David looks at the door. 47 seconds of silence. Then Sarah speaks, and Dr. Yamamoto realizes this isn't going to be a standard evaluation. She doesn't talk about heat stroke or dehydration or getting lost in the outback. She describes a second fence, one that runs parallel to the dingo fence, exactly 40 meters south, that doesn't appear on any map or satellite image. Made of something that isn't steel, isn't wire, isn't anything they could identify. She says it hums at a frequency just below human hearing, makes your teeth ache if you stand too close. And there are symbols on certain posts, symbols that match exactly what she's been drawing on the hospital floor for 2 days. Dr. Yamamoto glances at the tiles, the circle with a line through it, drawn 6,000 times. Marcus adds one detail. Their equipment went haywire near that inner fence. GPS stopped working. Compasses spun randomly. The temperature dropped 11 degrees the moment they crossed through, despite it being noon in the desert. He describes it clinically, like he's presenting data at a conference, but his hands shake so badly he has to sit on them. David Reeves talks about the footage. 3 cameras, redundant backups, over 40 hours of material, all destroyed now. He describes what he captured before it was lost. Structures in the distance that looked like buildings but seemed to shift position when you weren't looking directly at them. Vehicles moving through an area that's supposed to be uninhabited for 200 miles. And people. People in uniforms without insignias, working with purpose, like they belonged there. Dr. Yamamoto asks the obvious question. If you documented everything, why destroy the evidence? Why not take it to the media, to scientists who could verify your claims? Sarah leans forward, gripping the table edge. We didn't destroy it. Richardson did. She explains how it happened. Third night, making camp, Richardson went to check the perimeter, gone for 8 minutes. When he came back, something was different. Not his appearance, not his voice, but something underneath. He said they needed to delete everything immediately and leave. Said it so calmly, so reasonably, they almost listened. Almost. Then Marcus noticed Richardson's boots. He'd just walked through red desert sand for 8 minutes, and his boots were completely clean. Not a grain of dust. Perfectly pristine, like he'd been walking on sterile tile. David grabbed a camera, pointed it at Richardson, looked through the viewfinder. Through the lens, he could see something invisible to the naked eye. A distortion around him, like heat shimmer, but cold. And his shadow was pointing north when the sun was directly west. They ran, left everything except what they could carry. Sprinted back toward the outer fence, toward the normal side. Behind them, Richardson called out, asked them to wait, said he could explain. But his voice never changed volume, never got louder or softer, never showed strain from running. It stayed at exactly the same tone, the same calm pitch, for 6 miles. Even after they crossed back through the fence, even after they reached their vehicle, they could still hear it at the same volume. "Come back, let me explain. Don't let them know we saw." Dr. Yamamoto stops writing. He looks at 3 internationally respected researchers and sees something his training didn't prepare him for. Not delusion, not psychosis. Rational fear from people who know exactly how insane they sound. He asks one more question. If that wasn't Richardson anymore, what happened to the real one? Sarah draws her symbol again. It's not a circle, it's a map. The line isn't going through it, it's going down. Richardson found an entrance, and whatever's down there came back up wearing his face. Dr. Yamamoto submits his evaluation that evening, recommends extended observation, requires further assessment, notes unusual consistency in their shared account. His report is flagged by hospital administration within 2 hours. By the next morning, 2 men in unmarked suits are waiting in the director's office. They have credentials from agencies Dr. Yamamoto has never heard of. They want copies of everything: recordings, notes, observations. When he refuses on ethical grounds, they inform him those ethics are now superseded by obligations he wasn't aware he had. He asks what they mean. They tell him certain discoveries create certain responsibilities, and as of this morning, he has both. The 3 survivors spend their 4th night in room 307. Sarah drawing, Marcus counting, David recording silence on a dead phone. Outside their door, 2 security guards stand watch. The hospital calls it protection. At 3 a.m., the hallway lights flicker for just a moment. Sarah whispers to the others, "They're not protecting us. They're making sure we don't leave." 300 miles away, in the desert, a satellite phone activates for 6 seconds. Long enough to transmit one message to a tower that doesn't officially exist. 3 recovered, observing for symptoms. Awaiting protocols. The fence was built to keep things out, but nobody ever asked what it does to the people who learn it works both ways. 6 weeks earlier, Dr. James Richardson sat in a basement archive at the University of Melbourne, surrounded by documents that weren't supposed to exist. Land surveys from 1947, geological reports with entire sections redacted, testimony from Aboriginal elders recorded in 1963 and immediately classified. He'd been searching for 3 years, following a trail of inconsistencies and deliberate omissions that all pointed to the same 300 square mile section of the Australian outback. An area that officially contained nothing but sand, scrub brush, and the dingo fence. An area where satellites experienced mysterious technical failures. An area that local communities had avoided for generations, long before any fence was built. Richardson wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was a geologist with 2 PhDs and publications in every major scientific journal. But the data didn't lie. Seismic readings showed cavities underground that were too uniform to be natural. Mineral surveys detected elements in concentrations that made no geological sense. And in 1952, a mining company had started drilling in that exact location, reached a depth of 400 meters, and abandoned the operation overnight. The equipment was left in place. The workers were reassigned to projects on the other side of the country. The company dissolved within a year, its assets absorbed by subsidiaries that no longer existed. Richardson found one surviving engineer from that project, a man in his 90s living in Perth. The conversation lasted 4 minutes before the old man hung up. But he said enough. "We hit something that wasn't rock. It was warm. And when we pulled the drill bit up, it was clean, spotless, like something had polished it from the inside. Sarah Mitchell joined the project because Richardson showed her something she couldn't explain. 15 years of footage, dingoes approaching a specific invisible line in that region and stopping. Not because of the fence, this was decades of data from before the fence reached that section, but because of something else. Alpha males whining and retreating, entire packs refusing to cross. She'd tested every variable, prey distribution, water sources, territorial markers. Nothing explained it. The boundary was absolute and had been for generations. When Richardson overlaid her behavioral maps onto his geological surveys, the line matched exactly. Whatever was underground, the animals knew to stay away. Marcus Chen saw the electromagnetic data and didn't believe it at first. A low-frequency pulse, regular as a heartbeat, emanating from 400 meters below the surface. Too precise to be natural geological activity. Too consistent to be equipment error. He spent 2 months trying to debunk it, running every alternative explanation. Tectonic activity didn't fit the pattern. Mineral deposits couldn't generate that signature. Human equipment would have decayed or lost power decades ago. He was left with one conclusion he didn't want to accept. Something down there was active, had been active for at least 70 years, and showed no signs of stopping. He told Richardson he'd join the expedition on one condition. If they found the source, they document it properly before telling anyone, because nobody would believe them without irrefutable evidence. David Reeves was a documentary filmmaker with a reputation for uncomfortable truth. He'd covered war zones, environmental disasters, stories that powerful people wanted buried. Richardson approached him with unusual honesty. This might be nothing, might be a natural phenomenon with an unusual signature, but if it's something else, we need someone who can't be discredited easily, someone whose work speaks for itself. Reeves asked what Richardson meant by something else. Richardson showed him the 1952 drilling report, the Aboriginal testimonies, Sarah's animal behavior data. Reeves was quiet for a long time. Then he said he'd do it, but everything gets filmed, including the moments Richardson might want to keep off camera. Richardson agreed immediately. That's when Reeves knew this was serious. They spent 4 weeks planning. Permits were surprisingly easy to obtain. The land was privately owned, rarely visited, and the owner seemed almost eager to grant access. Too eager, Reeves noted. Most landowners in the outback are protective of their property, suspicious of researchers, worried about liability. This one approved their request within 6 hours and asked only one question. "You planning to go past the inner fence?" Richardson had said there was no inner fence on any map. The owner laughed. "That's not what I asked." He approved the permit anyway and never followed up. When Reeves tried to contact him later for a pre-interview, the number was disconnected. The property records showed the land had been owned by the same family trust since 1948. No names, no beneficiaries listed, just a P.O. box in Canberra. Supplies were standard for extended outback work. Water for 30 days, satellite communications, medical kit, GPS with redundant backups, 3 vehicles in case one failed, check-in protocols with the university every 72 hours. They weren't explorers rushing into unknown territory. They were scientists conducting a legitimate geological survey with proper safety measures. Everything looked routine on paper. The night before departure, Richardson showed them what he'd been holding back. A map, hand-drawn, dated 1961, included in one of the Aboriginal testimonies. It showed the area they were planning to visit, and in the center, a symbol, a circle with a line going down through it. Beneath the symbol, translated from the original language, 3 words. Where they sleep. Sarah asked the obvious question. Where who sleeps? Richardson pulled out the full testimony transcript. The elder had become violently agitated at that question, began speaking rapidly in a dialect the translator didn't recognize, then went silent and refused to continue. The government official conducting the interview noted, subject became hostile and uncooperative, possible mental degradation. But the translator had added a handwritten note in the margin, barely legible. He wasn't speaking language. He was mimicking something he'd heard. It wasn't human speech. Marcus asked if Richardson really believed something was down there, something conscious. Richardson looked at each of them. He said he believed in evidence, and the evidence showed patterns that required intent. Whether that meant secret human activity, unknown geological processes, or something that didn't fit existing categories, that's what they were going to determine. David asked the question nobody wanted to voice. What if we find something that shouldn't be found? What if there's a reason it's been hidden? Richardson was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, knowledge doesn't have a morality. Only what we do with it matters. And if something has been concealed from the scientific community for 70 years, that's a bigger crime than discovering it. They left Alice Springs on February 23rd. 3 vehicles, 4 researchers, enough documentation to satisfy any safety review. The university logged their departure. Local police were notified. Emergency contacts filed. Everything proper. They drove north into country that looked like every other stretch of Australian desert. Red sand, low scrub, endless sky. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, just emptiness that went on forever. On the second day, they reached the outer fence, the official dingo fence, marked on every map. They documented it thoroughly, standard construction, normal materials, regular maintenance tags with dates and contractor codes. They camped beside it that night. Sarah woke the others at 2 a.m. A pack of 7 dingoes sat exactly 60 meters away, not moving, not making sound, just sitting in perfect formation, watching their camp. She'd never seen that behavior. Dingoes are curious but cautious. They observe from distance and retreat. These weren't retreating. David grabbed a camera with night vision. Through the viewfinder, he could see their eyes reflecting the starlight. All 14 eyes fixed on the same point. Not the humans, not the vehicles, the fence. They were watching the fence like they were waiting for something to cross it. The next morning, they found the inner fence, exactly 40 meters south of the outer fence, running parallel, utterly absent from any map. It looked similar at first glance, posts and wire, standard construction. Then Marcus touched it and jerked his hand back. Metal that had been sitting in direct desert sun for hours was cold enough to sting skin. The temperature reading showed 14 degrees Celsius. The air temperature was 38, thermodynamically impossible without active cooling. David filmed it. Through the camera viewfinder, there was a shimmer in the air around each post, like heat distortion in reverse. Sarah walked the length looking for gates, nothing for half a mile. Then Richardson called out. He'd found the section. The posts were marked with the symbol from the map. Circle with a line going down, carved into the metal. Professional work, deliberate placement. Between 2 marked posts, the wire was different, still connected, still forming a barrier. But when Marcus pushed it, it flexed, not like metal, like membrane, like skin. He pulled his hand back, and they all saw it. The wire where he'd touched it was warm, body temperature warm. It had responded to contact. Richardson asked if everyone was ready. Sarah checked her equipment. Marcus took final readings. David verified all 3 cameras were recording. They were 48 hours from Alice Springs, within their planned route, following protocols. They were prepared, rational, careful. Richardson stepped up to the flexible section of fence. He paused, looked back at the others. Whatever we find, we document it. We don't touch anything we don't understand. We observe and record. Agreed? Everyone agreed. He pushed through. The fence resisted for a moment, then yielded. He disappeared through it like passing through a curtain. Sarah went next, then Marcus. David came last, camera running, filming everything. The temperature dropped 11 degrees instantly, not gradually. The moment they crossed, the air changed. David checked the thermometer. 27 degrees on one side of the fence, 16 on the other. The sun was the same, the sky was the same, but the temperature wasn't. Marcus took 3 steps forward and stopped. His GPS showed their position as exactly where they'd just been standing, on the wrong side of the fence. He walked another 10 meters. The GPS didn't update. It kept showing the same coordinates, as if they hadn't moved at all, as if the ground they were walking on didn't officially exist. Behind them, still on the outer side, the pack of dingoes sat watching. Not one moved to follow. They remained at the boundary where Sarah had documented that behavior for 15 years, watching 4 humans cross a line that no animal would. David's camera caught the last clear footage from that moment. Richardson turning back toward the fence, looking at the dingoes and saying quietly, almost to himself, "They know, they've always known, and they're smart enough to stay where they belong." Then they walked forward into the empty desert. The sand looked the same. The vegetation looked the same. But Sarah noticed something within the first 100 meters. No insects, no birds, no animal tracks, no signs of life at all, just silence that was too complete. Richardson checked his notes, oriented them northwest toward the coordinates where the seismic anomalies were strongest. Marcus noticed his shadow. The sun was behind them, east. His shadow pointed north, not west, north. He mentioned it to the others. Everyone checked. All 4 shadows pointed the same wrong direction. David filmed it. Through the camera, the shadows looked normal. But with naked eyes, they defied the position of the sun. They had 3 weeks of supplies. They would need 72 hours. But they didn't know that yet. They still thought they were in control. They still thought they were the ones doing the discovering. The first 6 hours past the inner fence felt almost normal. Red sand, sparse vegetation, the kind of landscape they'd worked in dozens of times before. They established base camp 2 kilometers in, 3 tents in a triangle, equipment in the center, vehicles positioned for quick departure, standard procedure. Marcus set up the monitoring station and immediately noticed the electromagnetic pulse was stronger here, more defined, coming from approximately 420 meters below them. Regular as a heartbeat. 1 pulse every 47 seconds, never varying. Sarah began her ecological survey. In 6 hours of searching a 5-kilometer radius, she found nothing alive. No insects, no lizards, no birds. Not unusual for remote desert, but this was absolute. And the silence wasn't peaceful, it was surgical. The Spinifex grass was the right species, the right color, but it didn't move quite right in the wind. too synchronized, like it was breathing together. David documented everything while Richardson took soil samples. The composition matched samples from outside the fence, identical minerals, identical structure, but it weighed less, 35% lighter with the same composition. Richardson ran the test 3 times, recalibrated the scale. The result didn't change. The matter here weighed less than it should. They worked until sunset. The temperature didn't drop gradually, it plummeted. 16 degrees to 4 in less than 20 minutes. They built a fire, but the flames behaved wrong. They burned perfectly vertical, no flicker, no matter which direction the wind blew. And the light didn't travel right. The fire's illumination reached about 3 meters, then stopped abruptly, like hitting a wall. Beyond that, complete darkness. David filmed it. The footage showed the same impossible thing. They agreed to 4-hour watch rotations. Sarah took first shift. At hour 2, she heard something. Not a sound. The absence of sound in a specific direction, like silence moving. She grabbed a flashlight, pointed it into the darkness. The beam traveled 5 meters and stopped. Not faded. Stopped. She swept it left and right. Same result everywhere. A sphere of visible space, and beyond it, nothing her light could touch. Marcus took second shift and tested every light source they had. Vehicle spotlights, headlamps, flares. None penetrated more than a few meters. The light was being produced, it just wasn't traveling, as if distance itself refused to let it continue. David took third shift and filmed the sky. The stars were visible, correct constellations, but they didn't twinkle. Perfectly steady, like holes in black paper. Stars twinkle because of atmosphere. These looked like they were being seen through nothing at all. Richardson took the final shift before dawn. He sat watching the impossible fire, thinking about their data. Taken individually, each observation was strange but explainable. Taken together, they formed a pattern, not natural variation, design. He wrote in his notebook, "We're not discovering something, we're inside something." Dawn came wrong, no gradual lightening. Darkness one moment, full daylight the next, like a switch flipped. The transition took less than 3 seconds, and 1 kilometer northwest there was a structure, regular geometry, right angles, solar panels. They'd surveyed that area yesterday and seen nothing. David checked his footage from yesterday afternoon. Empty desert. Now there was a building. They approached on foot. As they got closer, details emerged. A research station, prefabricated buildings, recent construction, well maintained. But it wasn't on any map, and it was locked from the outside. Heavy chains, commercial padlocks, warning signs in multiple languages. Authorized personnel only, contamination risk, do not enter. The locks were new, installed within months. The chains were overkill, the kind you'd use for quarantine facilities. Sarah found a window on the north side where the interior covering had pulled away, leaving a 2-centimeter gap. She looked through and stepped back immediately. Inside, the lights were on. Equipment was running, and on one desk, a coffee cup was steaming. Someone had been here minutes ago. Marcus looked through the gap and saw something else. On the far wall, a map. Their map, the one from the 1961 testimony, but annotated with dates and coordinates. And in the center, written in red marker, large enough to read, Breach Point Alpha, active since 1952, containment holding, do not approach. Richardson made the decision. They were going in. Marcus argued they should return to Alice Springs, report to authorities. Richardson said answers were inside that building, and they'd come too far to turn back now. The padlock on the main door was engaged, but not locked. The shackle clicked open with a gentle pull. Someone had made it look secured without securing it, like they'd wanted someone to find this place. Richardson tried the handle. Unlocked. He looked back at the others. Last chance to walk away. Nobody did. He opened the door. The interior was climate-controlled, comfortable, lived in. Coffee and electronics and something chemical underneath. The facility was larger than it appeared from outside. Workstations and equipment, doors leading to other sections, one labeled Observation Theater. On the main workstation, an unlocked computer displayed a document dated 3 days ago. Incident log, day 26,417. Subject 0 remains dormant. Surface activity minimal. Recommendation, maintain current protocols. David filmed the screen. Marcus downloaded files. Sarah found physical logs going back decades, different handwriting, all documenting observations of something below the facility. Something that pulsed. Something that sometimes tried to communicate. Something that had been here long before the fence, possibly long before humans. The logs called it Subject 0. They called it dormant but aware, contained but not controllable. Richardson found documentation of the 1952 drilling incident. Drill penetrated outer shell at 427 meters. Bit retrieved clean. Temperature at drill site increased 4 degrees. Pulse frequency increased. Activity level elevated. Drilling suspended indefinitely. After that entry, one word: breach. They found the door to the observation theater. Reinforced, pressure-sealed, a small window of triple-layered glass. Richardson looked through. The theater was a concrete room sloping downward. Stadium seating facing a large window looking down into a shaft going straight into the earth. Industrial lights descended every 20 meters. And at the limit of visibility, maybe 400 meters down, something moved. Not mechanical, not geological, something aware. Richardson stepped back, hands shaking. It's active, Marcus looked, watched for 2 minutes in silence. When he stepped away, his face was white. He described an opening too geometrically perfect to be natural. Walls that reflected light, wrong. And something inside that had mass but no clear shape, shifting between configurations like it existed in more dimensions than eyes could process. And when he'd looked down, it had looked back. He was certain. It had no eyes, but it had looked back. Sarah refused to look. David filmed through the window, knowing the footage probably wouldn't capture it. Richardson found a binder. Containment protocols. He read quickly, expression darkening. The facility wasn't here to study Subject 0. It was here to make sure nobody else did. The electromagnetic pulse was a monitoring system, tracking activity levels. The inner fence marked a quarantine boundary. And the reason their permits came through so easily was because someone wanted to see what happened when unauthorized people entered the zone. They were being tested. The facility was staffed. The coffee was hot, but nobody was here now. They'd left before Richardson's team arrived, left the door unlocked, left everything accessible. It was deliberate. Richardson told everyone to grab what they could carry and leave immediately. They moved fast, taking hard drives, notebooks, cameras. David was filming one last sweep when the lights flickered. The temperature dropped instantly, 22 degrees to 8 in a single breath. And from below, a sound. The pulse they'd been measuring was now audible. A deep vibration, felt more than heard. One pulse every 46 seconds. It had been 47 yesterday. It was accelerating. Automated systems activated. Alarms, red lights, a recorded message. Containment breach detected. All personnel evacuate to secondary perimeter. But there was no breach. The doors were sealed. The shaft was contained. Unless the breach wasn't about something getting out. Unless it was about them getting in. They ran. Made it 50 meters before Richardson stopped, turned back, said he'd forgotten something critical. Marcus grabbed his arm. Richardson pulled free, said he'd seen something in the protocols they needed. He ran back before anyone could stop him. They waited outside. 1 minute, 2, 3. At minute 4, Richardson appeared in the doorway, walking slowly, carefully. He reached them and smiled. Said everything was fine, they should pack up and head back. His voice was calm, perfectly normal, but his boots were spotless, not a grain of sand on them. Sarah saw it first, stepped back. Marcus looked down, saw the boots. David raised his camera, looked through the viewfinder, and froze. Through the lens, there was a distortion around Richardson, and his shadow pointed north. The sun was overhead. He shouldn't have had a shadow at all. They ran, left everything, just ran toward the fence, toward the boundary. Behind them, Richardson called out, voice never changing volume, never fading with distance. "Come back, let me explain. Don't let them know we saw." The same calm tone for 6 miles, following them like it was coming from inside their heads. They crossed the inner fence at full sprint. The wire resisted, held for a moment, released. Temperature shock, cold to hot. They kept running past both fences, past where the dingoes watched, until their legs gave out and they collapsed. Behind them, something stood on the other side. It looked like Richardson, had his face, his posture, but it wasn't breathing hard, wasn't sweating, just standing perfectly still, perfectly patient. It raised one hand in a slow wave, then turned and walked back toward the facility, boots leaving no tracks, still calling in Richardson's voice. "Don't let them know we saw." They walked to Alice Springs, 48 kilometers over 2 days. They didn't talk, didn't rest more than an hour at a time. Sarah started drawing symbols in the sand, compulsively. Marcus counted obsessively, making sure there were still 3 of them. David held his dead camera like a weapon. They reached the police station on March 11th and requested psychiatric evaluation. The automated systems at the facility logged something 2 days later. Entity resembling missing researcher observed at inner perimeter. Does not cross boundary. Remains in containment zone. Behavior pattern. Waiting. It's still there. Still waiting. And every 46 seconds, the pulse continues. Getting faster. Dr. Yamamoto's report to the hospital administration was filed on March 17th. Professional, clinical, noting the consistency of the shared narrative, but recommending psychiatric evaluation for possible trauma-induced delusion. The report was read by the director at 8 a.m. By 9 a.m., the director received a phone call from Canberra. By noon, room 307 was declared a restricted area, and the 2 guards outside the door were replaced by 4, wearing uniforms without department insignias. Sarah Mitchell noticed the change immediately. The new guards didn't make eye contact, didn't respond to questions, didn't acknowledge the patients as human beings. They stood like sentries at a military installation, watching the door not to protect what was inside, but to contain it. She whispered to Marcus and David at 2 a.m. "They're not hospital security. Look at how they stand. That's military posture." On March 18th, a woman arrived requesting to visit the patients in room 307. Marcus's sister, proper identification, all visitor forms completed. The guards denied her entry. No explanation, no legal justification. She argued, threatened legal action, demanded to speak to administration. The guards didn't respond. She left and contacted a lawyer. The paperwork was filed and flagged as relating to national security within 15 minutes. The case was sealed. That evening, 2 men visited Dr. Elizabeth Chen and showed her credentials she wasn't allowed to photograph. She hasn't attempted to visit again. Inside room 307, routines deepened. Sarah drew her symbol exactly 600 times per day. If she drew fewer, physical discomfort built in her chest until she completed the count. Marcus added something to his counting ritual. Every hour, he checked their shadows, made them stand by the window, observed direction and length compared to the sun's position. Everything was always normal, but he checked anyway, because if it changed, that would mean it had followed them back. David continued recording with his dead camera, but now he narrated, speaking quietly to the lens, describing what he saw, what he remembered, creating an audio record since the video was destroyed. He spoke for hours, repeating information, building comprehensive verbal documentation. The nurses thought he was paranoid. They didn't know his camera was confiscated every night during inspections and returned every morning. Someone was checking what he was recording, even though the battery had been dead since the desert. Dr. Yamamoto tried to visit on March 19th. He was told his security clearance had been revoked, his access permanently suspended, and his continued employment depended on his cooperation. He asked what investigations. They told him certain knowledge creates certain obligations. He resigned that afternoon and contacted a journalist he'd worked with before, a woman named Amanda Price. Amanda Price had 2 decades of experience exposing government corruption. Dr. Yamamoto met her at a cafe in downtown Sydney, showed her his notes, explained the security response. She listened, agreed it was worth investigating. 2 days later, her editor killed the story, said it was too speculative, too risky legally. Amanda had never had a story killed in 15 years. The decision came from ownership level. She started investigating independently. Amanda requested public records related to the land where Richardson's team had been working. Every request was denied under national security exemptions. She contacted Aboriginal land councils in the region, asked about cultural significance. An elder agreed to speak off the record. He told her the area had been forbidden since before white people arrived. He wouldn't say why, but he told her one thing. Every few generations, someone goes into that country, and every time, the fence gets longer. She asked what he meant. He said his people put up the first markers, trying to keep everyone away. Then white people built their fence, not understanding they were marking the same boundary. And now there are more fences, deeper into the country, expanding the prohibited zone. Like whatever's there is claiming more territory, and the fences are humanity's way of pretending they're containing it. Amanda contacted Dr. Yamamoto and shared what she'd learned. He told her the 3 patients were effectively in custody, no visitors allowed. She asked if there was any way to get information out of that room. He remembered David Reeves narrating into his dead camera. If someone could access it, there might be an audio record. She couldn't enter as a journalist, but she could as a delivery person. Flowers, standard hospital delivery. She wore a company uniform, carried an arrangement addressed to room 307, walked in during shift change. She knocked. A nurse opened the door, and in those 5 seconds, Amanda made eye contact with David Reeves and mouthed 2 words. "Keep recording." He nodded. The door closed. That night, David recorded everything he hadn't already narrated: specific coordinates, the facility's appearance, warning signs text, the incident log, the observation theater layout. He spoke for 3 hours until he documented every detail. When guards came for nightly inspection, they took the camera, checked it, found nothing but audio of a man talking to himself. They returned it in the morning. They didn't know the camera had a secondary memory card hidden in the battery compartment. The primary memory appeared empty. The secondary stored everything. On March 22nd, something changed. The electromagnetic pulse shifted frequency. It had been steady at 1 pulse per 46 seconds since their escape. At 3 a.m., it jumped to 45 seconds. Marcus felt it before his equipment registered it, like a heartbeat accelerating. He checked his portable detector, smuggled into the hospital. The reading confirmed it. He told Sarah and David. Sarah's drawing increased in speed, her hand moving faster, completing the symbol with greater urgency. David picked up his camera. "It knows we're talking about it, and it's responding." The guards noticed the increased agitation. Within an hour, a doctor arrived, someone none of them had seen before. He entered with 2 guards and a medical kit, said the patients were being transferred to a more appropriate facility. Sarah asked what specialized needs. He didn't answer, just prepared 3 syringes. David raised his camera and filmed. The doctor told him to put it down. David refused. The guards moved forward. Sarah screamed. Pure sound, loud enough to be heard throughout the entire ward. Within seconds, hospital staff flooded the hallway, demanding to know what was happening. The doctor tried to explain he had proper authorization, but couldn't produce documentation immediately. In that moment of confusion, the head nurse made a decision. No one was being transferred until the hospital director reviewed paperwork personally. The doctor argued. The nurse stood her ground. Hospital security arrived, and the situation became a standoff. The doctor and his guards left, said they'd return with proper documentation. The head nurse posted hospital security outside room 307 in addition to the existing guards, creating dual custody where neither side could act without the other's agreement. Amanda Price published a limited story the next morning. Not in the Sydney Morning Herald, they'd killed it, but on an independent news website. She didn't mention patients by name, didn't reveal specific locations, just outlined a pattern. Researchers entering remote areas. Security responses disproportionate to situations. Families denied access. Public records sealed. Questions about what the government might be hiding in the outback. The story was read by 43,000 people in 6 hours. By evening, 200,000 views. By next morning, trending on social media, and mainstream outlets were forced to acknowledge it. The pressure was building. Public attention was focusing on a story the government had been trying to contain quietly. In room 307, the 3 survivors watched news coverage. They saw their story, distorted and incomplete, but recognizable, entering public consciousness. Sarah stopped drawing for the first time in days. Marcus stopped counting. David lowered his camera. For the first time since Alice Springs, something resembling hope appeared. They'd created a record. They'd made sure someone knew. That night, the pulse shifted again. 1 pulse every 44 seconds. And 300 miles away, the automated systems registered something new. The entity resembling Dr. Richardson had moved closer to the fence. Standing directly against the wire now, hands resting on the barrier, head tilted like it was listening. The seismic sensors registered vibration patterns underground, rhythmic, regular, like something far below responding to something far above, like a conversation. The automated log entry was simple. Communication detected, intent unclear, recommendation, increase monitoring. Dr. Yamamoto received a phone call at 2 a.m. on March 24th. Unknown number, unrecognized voice. The voice told him the 3 patients were going to disappear within 48 hours, transferred to a facility that doesn't officially exist. Once moved, no lawyer would find them. No journalist could verify their location. They'd become ghosts. If he wanted to prevent that, he had one option. Make enough noise that disappearing them becomes more dangerous than leaving them visible. The call ended. He called Amanda Price, told her everything, the full details, the patients' names, their credentials, the specifics of their story. He gave her his clinical notes, his assessment that their account was too consistent to be fabricated. Amanda asked if he understood what publishing this would do to his career. He said some things were more important. The story went live at 6 a.m. on March 24th. Full names, full details, everything. Within an hour, it exploded across every platform. Government officials forced to respond. The official response was predictable. No comment on security matters. Patient privacy prevents disclosure. Unverified claims. But the response itself confirmed something was happening. By noon, protesters gathered outside St. Vincent's Hospital. Maybe 40 people, enough to attract cameras, enough to make the situation visible. They demanded the patients be allowed legal representation, family visits, transparent due process. The hospital released a statement about appropriate care and respected rights, but couldn't provide specifics. The statement satisfied no one. Inside room 307, the survivors heard the protests outside their window, heard people chanting their names, demanding their freedom. Sarah started crying, first tears since the desert. Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. David raised his camera and recorded the sound of people who believed them. The pulse shifted again, one pulse every 43 seconds. In the desert, the entity began moving along the perimeter, walking the fence length slowly, methodically, like testing for weaknesses. Somewhere in Canberra, someone read those alerts and made a decision. The situation was escalating on multiple fronts. The public story was out of control. The entities were becoming active. And 3 witnesses were becoming symbols, impossible to disappear quietly. New protocols were required. At 8 p.m., a convoy of vehicles arrived at St. Vincent's Hospital. Official government vehicles with proper insignia, accompanied by federal police, everything documented and visible. They weren't hiding anymore. They were asserting authority publicly. Protesters chanted louder, cameras recorded everything, journalists shouted questions. The officials entered with court orders, properly filed and served, authorizing transfer of 3 individuals to a secure medical facility. The head nurse read the orders, consulted with legal counsel, understood she had no basis to refuse. She made one request. The transfer would happen publicly, in front of cameras, with the patients able to speak if they chose. The officials agreed. They had no choice. Sarah, Marcus, and David were escorted from room 307 at 8:30 p.m. They walked through corridors surrounded by federal police, out the main entrance into camera flashes and shouted questions. Amanda Price was there, pushed to the front, shouting, "What did you see in the desert?" Sarah Mitchell stopped walking. The officers tried to guide her forward, but she planted her feet and turned to face the cameras. She spoke clearly, loudly, making sure every microphone caught her words. "We found a facility monitoring something underground that's been there for 70 years. Something alive, something aware. The government has been keeping it secret, lying about what's in our own country. Dr. James Richardson is still out there, or something wearing his face is, waiting at the fence. And whatever's below is waking up. That's what we saw. That's why they want us quiet." The officers moved her into a vehicle before she could say more. Marcus and David were loaded into separate vehicles. The convoy departed through crowds, cameras following, helicopters overhead. Broadcast live on 3 channels. The government had made the transfer legal and public, but Sarah Mitchell had used the platform. Her statement was played and replayed, analyzed and discussed, impossible to ignore. In the now empty room 307, a nurse found something during final sweep. David Reeves's camera, left on the windowsill, battery dead. She almost threw it away, but something made her check the battery compartment. Inside, a memory card with a note. "Everything is recorded here. If we disappear, this is the proof. Please find Amanda Price, Sydney Morning Herald." The nurse stood holding that camera, understanding she had a choice: follow protocol or follow conscience. She thought about the 3 people she'd cared for, their fear, their gratitude when they'd heard protesters. She thought about officials who treated patients like prisoners. She made her choice. That night, Amanda Price received a package. No return address, just the note taped to the memory card. She loaded it and listened to 3 hours of David Reeves's narration, his detailed description of everything they'd found. She listened to his voice, calm and thorough, building a record because he'd known they might not survive. She understood she was holding the most important story of her career. The pulse shifted, 1 pulse every 42 seconds. And 300 miles away, the thing at the fence moved away from the perimeter, not retreating, advancing, walking back toward the facility, toward the observation theater, toward the shaft. The cameras tracked it until it entered the building and disappeared. The automated systems waited for it to re-emerge. It didn't. The last log entry was time-stamped 11:47 p.m. Entity entered observation theater, descended into primary shaft, current location unknown. All monitoring equipment below 200 meters has ceased functioning. Recommend immediate. The log ended mid-sentence. The facility's power failed completely. Emergency systems didn't activate. Backup generators didn't engage. Everything went dark, and when satellite surveillance checked at dawn, the building was gone. Not destroyed, gone. The foundation remained. The cleared ground remained. But every structure had vanished. Only the fences remained, marking a boundary around nothing. In separate vehicles traveling north, 3 people felt the change at the exact same moment. A pressure releasing, like exhaling a breath held for weeks. Sarah stopped drawing. Marcus stopped counting. David set down his camera. They didn't know what had changed, but they felt it. Something had shifted. The convoy drove on through darkness, carrying 3 witnesses toward an unknown destination. Behind them, a journalist prepared to publish everything. And in the desert, A fence surrounded an empty space where something impossible had been contained for 70 years and was now, suddenly, free. The convoy traveled north for 3 hours before Sarah Mitchell realized they weren't heading toward any facility she recognized. She'd worked across Australia for 15 years, knew the locations of research stations, government installations, military bases. This route led nowhere official, just deeper into empty country, away from witnesses. The 2 federal police officers in her vehicle hadn't spoken since Sydney. When she asked where they were going, they stared ahead in silence. Marcus Chen was in the lead vehicle, counting, tracking time, estimating speed, calculating distance. 3 hours at roughly 100 kilometers per hour meant approximately 300 kilometers from Sydney, heading northwest. Northwest led toward the interior, toward remote country, toward places where people could disappear. He thought about the phone call Dr. Yamamoto had received, the warning about facilities that don't officially exist. David Reeves was in the 3rd vehicle with 3 officers instead of 2. They'd identified him as the documentation risk. They'd searched him thoroughly, confiscated his phone, his wallet, anything that could communicate. But they'd missed something. A small voice recorder, old technology, taped to the inside of his leg during the chaos of transfer. It had been recording for 3 hours. At the 3-hour and 17-minute mark, the lead vehicle's radio crackled. Approaching Waypoint Delta, confirm clearance for final approach. The vehicles began slowing. David looked out. Nothing visible except darkness and scrubland. The convoy turned onto an unpaved track, rougher terrain, bouncing over uneven ground. 20 minutes into absolute nowhere. Then lights appeared. Not buildings, portable floodlights. A clearing with several prefabricated structures, recently assembled, vehicles parked in perimeter. This wasn't permanent. This was temporary. Something that could be dismantled within hours, leaving no trace. The convoy stopped. Officers established security, then opened doors. Sarah stepped out and immediately understood. This place had no official designation, no permanent staff, no records. Whatever happened here would happen off the books. She saw Marcus escorted from the lead vehicle, David from the 3rd, caught their eyes before officers separated them. Marcus mouthed something. She read his lips. Stay ready. They were directed to the largest prefab structure. Inside, clinical setup, medical equipment, examination tables, monitoring devices. A man in civilian clothes waited, introduced himself as Dr. Garrett. He explained they would undergo comprehensive evaluation, standard procedure for individuals exposed to potential contamination in restricted zones. Sarah asked what kind of contamination. Dr. Garrett said that would be determined through testing. David asked if they had the right to refuse. Dr. Garrett smiled and said they'd consented when they entered a quarantine zone without authorization. The Biosecurity Act gave the government broad powers. Their consent wasn't required. They were separated into different sections, each room identical, sterile, equipped with restraints built into the examination tables. Sarah watched Dr. Garrett prepare instruments, syringes, collection vials. His hands shook slightly. She asked if he'd done this before, evaluated people from inside the containment zone. He paused. You're the first to come back and talk about it. In the adjacent room, Marcus asked direct questions. Had there been previous expeditions? Had anyone else reported similar phenomena? The doctor deflected, but in deflecting, confirmed something. There had been others, and those others hadn't come back in condition to provide useful data. Outside the examination rooms, in a command structure, officials monitored through cameras and audio feeds. They were looking for signs of infection, behavioral changes, anything suggesting the subjects had brought something back. The pulse frequency was being monitored in real time, transmitted from the desert, still accelerating. 42 seconds, 41, 40. Each increase corresponded with increased activity in the containment zone. A senior official whose name wasn't used studied the data and made an assessment. The 3 subjects showed no obvious signs of contamination yet, but that didn't mean they were safe. Dr. Richardson had shown no signs for 6 hours after exposure, then changed suddenly, completely. These 3 had been exposed for 72 hours. If they were going to change, it could happen at any moment. She gave the order: full quarantine protocols, indefinite holding, continuous monitoring, complete isolation. If they remained stable for 6 months, re-evaluation. If they showed any signs of change, immediate termination and incineration. The official receiving this order asked about legal justification. The senior official said survival took precedence. Lawyers could argue about rights later. In the examination room, Sarah felt the shift before she understood it. Dr. Garrett's demeanor changed, became more distant. He prepared a sedative, explained it would help her remain calm during extended evaluation. Sarah asked how extended. He didn't answer. She realized then that none of them were leaving. She stood up. Dr. Garrett asked her to sit. She moved toward the door. 2 security officers entered, blocking her exit. She saw the resolve in their faces, understood they would use force. She sat back down, not complying, but calculating. 3 of them, multiple guards, isolated location. Direct resistance would fail. They needed something else. Hours passed. The evaluations continued, samples taken, questions asked, data collected. Sarah lost track of time in the windowless room, just fluorescent lights and clinical procedures. Then, around what felt like midnight, she heard something. A sound from outside the facility, distant but distinct. An engine. Multiple engines, vehicles approaching. Through the thin prefab walls, she heard raised voices in the command center. Confusion. Nobody was scheduled to arrive. The perimeter security was radioing in, reporting unidentified vehicles approaching from the south, not responding to challenges. The facility went on alert. Officers who'd been monitoring the examination rooms were pulled to reinforce perimeter security. For the first time in hours, Sarah was alone in her room. She moved to the door, tried the handle. Locked from outside, but the mechanism was simple, designed for medical privacy, not security detention. She looked around for anything useful. The medical tray had been removed, but the examination table had adjustable components, metal framework. She worked one of the support bars loose. Thin but rigid, wedged it into the door frame, leveraged her weight. The lock mechanism bent, clicked, gave way. The corridor was empty, officers responding to the perimeter alert. She moved quickly to the next door, Marcus's room, used the same technique. He emerged, immediately understanding the situation. Together, they moved to David's room. The lock was stronger, reinforced. They were working on it when the lights went out. Not a flicker this time. Total darkness. The generator had failed. Emergency backup lights should have activated within seconds. They didn't. The facility was completely black. And in that darkness, Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze. Footsteps in the corridor. Wrong rhythm, wrong weight distribution. Not human walking. A voice in the darkness, Richardson's voice, perfectly calm. I told you, it wants to meet you. Running just delays the inevitable. Sarah pressed against the wall, Marcus beside her. The footsteps moved closer, methodical, unhurried. Then emergency lights activated, dim red illumination. At the end of the corridor, a figure. It looked like Richardson, same face, same build. But it moved wrong, too smooth, and it wasn't alone. Two more figures emerged from the darkness behind it. Different faces, different builds, but the same wrong movement. Previous victims, previous expeditions. The Richardson entity spoke. The vehicles outside are a distraction. There's no rescue coming. Just more witnesses, more people for it to understand. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm, pulled her toward the opposite end of the corridor. They ran, hearing the entities behind them, not running, just walking at that same measured pace. They reached a corner, found David's door finally open. He'd broken out during the darkness. "This way," he shouted, pointing toward an emergency exit. They burst through into the night. The facility was chaos. The unidentified vehicles had reached the perimeter, and what emerged from them wasn't rescue. More entities, at least 7 of them. Different faces, but all moving with that same unnatural precision. The facility's security was trying to establish defensive positions, but they were confused, unprepared. Some officers were firing weapons. The bullets connected, passed through the entities like they were shooting dense fog. "They're not here for us," David said, understanding. "They're here for the facility, for the data." He was right. The entities moved through the chaos purposefully, entering the command structure, the examination rooms, anywhere information was stored. One of them walked past a security officer who fired an entire magazine at point-blank range. The entity didn't react, didn't acknowledge the officer's existence, just continued toward its objective. It wasn't interested in killing, it was collecting. Sarah, Marcus, and David used the confusion to move toward the perimeter where civilian vehicles were parked. Marcus found one unlocked, older model. He pulled the steering column panel, started crossing wires. The engine turned over. They got in. As Marcus put it in gear, the Richardson entity appeared beside the driver's window. It placed one hand on the glass. Frost spread from the contact point, ice crystals forming instantly. The window began to crack from temperature stress. The entity looked at Marcus through the frosting glass and spoke, voice muffled but clear. "Tell them what you saw. Tell everyone. Make them understand what's coming. That's your purpose now." Marcus accelerated. The window shattered from the cold, safety glass exploding into tiny fragments. They drove away from the facility, into the darkness, the old vehicle bouncing over rough terrain. Behind them, the entities continued their work, methodical and thorough, gathering everything, learning everything. They drove for an hour, no roads, navigating by stars, before the adrenaline began to fade and the reality of their situation set in. They were in the middle of nowhere, in a stolen vehicle with less than a quarter tank of fuel, being hunted by something that couldn't be killed, and being monitored by a government that wanted them disappeared. Sarah started laughing, not humor, just the absurdity of it. They'd escaped a secret facility only to be stranded in the outback with no supplies and no plan. "We head east," Marcus said, "toward populated areas. We get to people, to cameras, to anywhere public." They drove until the fuel gauge hit empty, then coasted to a stop as the sun began to rise. They were somewhere in the scrubland, no landmarks, no idea exactly where. They started walking east, the sun behind them, nothing to drink, nothing to eat, Just 3 people who'd survived the impossible trying to survive the mundane. They walked for 6 hours. The heat built steadily. No shade, no water. Sarah's lips cracked and bled. Marcus developed a headache from dehydration. David's voice recorder finally ran out of battery. 3 hours and 42 minutes of audio captured. They kept walking because stopping meant dying. At hour 7, they saw dust in the distance. A vehicle approaching. They were too exhausted to run, too dehydrated to care if it was government or entities or anything else. They just stood there, waiting. The vehicle got closer. A battered 4-wheel drive, civilian plates. It stopped 50 meters away. A woman got out, not young, maybe mid-50s, weathered face, practical clothing. She looked at 3 exhausted people standing in the middle of nowhere and asked a simple question. "You the ones from the news? The researchers?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. The woman walked to her vehicle, retrieved water bottles, brought them over. "Drink slowly, you're dehydrated." She waited while they drank, then said, "I'm Margaret. I run a station about 80 kilometers east. Saw the news coverage, saw the convoy heading northwest. Figured you might end up out here if things went wrong." "Been driving search patterns for 6 hours." "Why?" Marcus asked. Margaret looked at him like the question was stupid. "Because they're lying about what's out there. Everyone knows it. We've known it for generations. And someone finally had the guts to say it publicly. Figured that deserved help." She drove them to her station, a remote property with solar panels and satellite internet. She fed them, let them rest, and most importantly, she had communication equipment. Sarah called Amanda Price using a satellite phone. Amanda had been driving through the night, searching, coordinating with other journalists and activists who'd mobilized when the convoy's route was leaked by sympathetic sources. "We need to meet," Sarah said. "We need to tell everything again, on camera, before they find us." They arranged a location, a roadside stop halfway between Margaret's station and where Amanda was driving from. Margaret drove them there, refused payment, refused recognition, just said, "Tell the truth, all of it. That's payment enough." Amanda arrived 3 hours later with a satellite uplink and camera equipment. She looked at 3 exhausted, dehydrated, traumatized researchers and asked, "Can you do this? Can you tell it all again?" "We have to," David said, pulling out his voice recorder even though it was dead, holding it like a talisman. "We have to make sure everyone knows before they silence us." They sat in the shade of a roadside shelter and created the most important documentation of their lives. But this time, they didn't just describe what they saw. They described the government response, the secret facility, the attempted permanent detention, the entities that had attacked the field installation. They described everything, holding nothing back, understanding that complete transparency was their only protection. Amanda filmed it all, uploaded in real time to servers in multiple countries. By the time the sun set, the video had been viewed 2 million times. By midnight, 20 million. By morning, it was global news, impossible to suppress. But while they were giving that interview, while the video was spreading across the world, something else was happening in the desert. The temporary facility they'd escaped from was found by official response teams 12 hours after the entity incursion. The structures were still there, but everything inside was gone. Every computer, every file, every sample they'd taken from Sarah, Marcus, and David. Removed with surgical precision, as if the entities had known exactly what they were looking for. And in the center of the command structure, written in frost on the metal floor, a message in perfect English. "Thank you for the data. We understand now. We'll be ready when it wakes." The pulse continued. One pulse every 37 seconds, accelerating. The automated systems in the desert sent their final transmissions before going offline permanently. Subject Zero was no longer dormant. The entities had completed their reconnaissance. The awakening was in progress. 300 miles from where Sarah, Marcus, and David sat giving their interview, the ground around the empty facility site began to crack. Not earthquake movement, too controlled, too geometric. The cracks formed patterns, precise and purposeful, radiating outward from where the observation shaft had been. And from those cracks, light emerged. Not normal light, something that hurt to look at, something that suggested dimensions beyond human perception. The dingo fence, all 3,488 miles of it, began to vibrate. Animals heard it first, mass movements inland, driven by instinct older than thought. The inner fence started to glow faintly, like it was conducting energy, like it was never meant to contain, but to mark territory already claimed. Sarah, Marcus, and David didn't know this yet. They would learn soon enough. For now, they sat in the fading light, telling their story, hoping transparency would be protection. They were partly right. The government couldn't disappear them anymore. But what was emerging in the desert didn't care about governments or witnesses or human concerns. It had been sleeping longer than human civilization had existed. And now, after 70 years of study, after drilling that breached its shell, after decades of monitoring, it was awake. And it was curious about the species that had disturbed its sleep. The entities had gathered data. Now it would act on that data. And 3 people who'd seen too much were about to learn that being alive to tell the story didn't mean the story was over. It meant they were alive for what came next. The video went viral in ways that transcended normal information spread. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed by over 100 million people across every continent, translated into 43 languages, analyzed by experts, debunked by skeptics, defended by believers. The Australian government's initial response was standard denial, official statements calling it an elaborate hoax, misinformation designed to cause panic. But the details were too specific, the credentials too solid, and independent journalists had begun finding corroborating evidence. Satellite imagery analysts found thermal signatures in the desert region that didn't match natural geological activity. A researcher at Australian National University came forward with documents showing government funding for subterranean monitoring in that specific region, funding that had continued for 70 years under classified programs. The evidence was fragmentary, but it existed, and it matched the story too closely to be coincidental. By day 3, the Prime Minister addressed the situation publicly. The statement was carefully crafted, acknowledging ongoing scientific research in remote areas, some involving classified defense applications. He neither confirmed nor denied the specific claims, instead pivoting to national security and the dangers of unauthorized entry into restricted zones. He announced an independent review committee. The statement satisfied no one, but bought time. Behind the scenes, officials who understood what was happening in the desert were having emergency consultations. The public attention was manageable. The real crisis was what the monitoring systems were reporting. Subject Zero was no longer just active, it was moving. Something the size of a city block shifting position 400 meters underground, moving slowly, deliberately, directionally, toward the surface. The electromagnetic pulse had accelerated to 1 pulse every 34 seconds. The pattern had changed. No longer a simple rhythmic beat, but something more complex, almost like communication. It was talking to something, the entities, coordinating. A decision was made at the highest levels. Sarah Mitchell, Marcus Chen, and David Reeves had become too visible to disappear quietly. But credibility could be undermined. A specialized unit was tasked with a specific objective: discredit the witnesses without creating martyrs. The operation began on day 4. News stories started appearing in sensationalist outlets, taking the researchers' claims and adding exaggerations, wild speculation, connections to conspiracy theories. Stories about alien contact, government mind control, supernatural phenomena, designed to blur the line between the researchers' actual testimony and fringe nonsense. Simultaneously, anonymous sources provided information about the researchers' backgrounds. Sarah Mitchell's early controversial paper, criticized for methodological flaws. Marcus Chen's employment contract he'd left early due to disagreements with management. David Reeves's documentary subjects, who later claimed misrepresentation. None of it was fabricated. All of it was real. But it was curated, presented without context, designed to create doubt. Public opinion began to fracture. The researchers still had strong support, but now there was a counter-narrative. Amanda Price recognized what was happening and tried to counter it, publishing detailed rebuttals, providing context. But she was one journalist fighting a coordinated campaign. The doubt had been planted. On day 6, Margaret was found dead in her home. Official cause: heart attack. She was 54, no history of heart disease, had been in excellent health. Local police ruled it natural causes. Her satellite internet logs were seized as part of routine estate processing and never returned to her family. Sarah heard about it through activist contacts. A phone call at 3 a.m., a voice she didn't recognize telling her the woman who'd saved them was gone. Sarah sat in the darkness of the safe house, phone in hand, understanding exactly what it meant. She woke Marcus and David, told them quietly, watched their faces process it. Margaret had helped them, and now she was dead. Natural causes, David said, voice hollow. Doesn't matter if it was or wasn't, Marcus replied. The message is the same. People who help us face consequences. They sat in silence for a long time. Then Sarah spoke. We need to go back to the desert, document what's happening in real time. Live broadcast, multiple cameras, make it impossible to hide. That's insane, Marcus said. Whatever's down there is waking up. Going back is suicide. Staying here is slower suicide. They'll keep coming at us until no one believes us, or until public attention fades. Then we'll have an accident. The only way we survive is if we're too important to kill. Real-time documentation of Subject Zero emerging, that's information they'd do anything to suppress. Which means it's our leverage. They debated for hours. David sided with Sarah. Marcus took longer, but eventually agreed. Not because he thought it was safe, but because he understood the trajectory they were on. They contacted Amanda Price. She thought they were crazy, but agreed to help. She'd arrange equipment, transportation, satellite uplink, redundant broadcast capabilities. The plan was set for 3 days out, but on day 7, everything accelerated. The pulse jumped frequency, not gradually, instantly, from 34 seconds to 20 seconds. The change was detected by monitoring systems worldwide. Scientists tracking the electromagnetic signature suddenly saw the acceleration and understood something was wrong. Papers were published within hours. Governments scrambled to classify information that had already spread too far. And in the desert, the ground opened. Not earthquake collapse, something else. The shaft expanded from 3 meters diameter to 30 meters in less than an hour. Controlled, precise, like something was widening its access deliberately. The Australian Defence Force was mobilized, units deployed to establish a perimeter, but they were working with limited information, classified briefings that told them to contain the area without explaining what they were containing. Soldiers arrived to find a hole in the ground 50 meters across and growing, with light emanating from deep below. Light that hurt to look at, that made equipment malfunction. The entities appeared, not 3, dozens, all wearing different faces, all moving with that wrong precision. They didn't attack the soldiers, didn't acknowledge them. They stood at regular intervals around the expanding breach, like sentries, waiting. News helicopters got footage before airspace was restricted. The hole, the light, the entities in formation, soldiers trying to control something clearly beyond military response. The footage went live, seen by millions before the government could suppress it. The images were undeniable. Sarah, Marcus, and David watched the broadcasts and understood their timeline had collapsed. They'd been planning 3 days. They needed to go now. Amanda Price arrived within 2 hours, vehicle loaded with equipment. She looked at 3 exhausted researchers and asked if they were sure. "No," Sarah said, "but we're going anyway." They loaded up and started driving west. 8 hours if they pushed hard. They had satellite phones, cameras, broadcasting equipment, enough battery and fuel for days. They notified every media outlet about their plan, created a schedule for live broadcasts, made sure multiple organizations had independent feeds. The government became aware of their movement within 3 hours. Police were dispatched to intercept. At the 4-hour mark, they hit the first roadblock. 2 police vehicles blocking the highway, officers standing ready. Amanda slowed but didn't stop, instead turning onto a service road she'd scouted on maps. The police followed, but the terrain favored 4-wheel drive over patrol cars. They lost them in the scrubland. At hour 6, a helicopter appeared, following them from above. Not police, something else. No markings. It shadowed them for 20 minutes, then veered off. Sarah watched it go and said quietly, "They're not trying to stop us anymore. They're tracking us." "Why track instead of stop?" David asked. "Because they want to know where we're going," Marcus said. "Or they want us to lead something to us. Or they've decided we're more useful as a distraction." None of the options were comforting. They kept driving. By dawn on day 8, they were within 50 kilometers of the breach site. They could see the glow on the horizon, light visible in daylight, pale luminescence that looked wrong against blue sky. They found elevated ground with clear line of sight, still outside the military perimeter, but close enough to observe, to document, to broadcast. Amanda set up equipment while the others prepared. The first broadcast was scheduled for noon, maximum global audience. At 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes before schedule, the pulse stopped, not slowed, stopped completely. Total silence from the monitoring equipment. Marcus checked readings 3 times. Equipment was functioning. The pulse had simply ceased. "It's not winding down," he said. "It's finished. Whatever it was counting down to, we just reached 0. They went live early. Cameras pointed toward the breach, toward the light, toward the entities in formation. Sarah began narrating, describing what they were seeing, providing context. Marcus added technical data. David filmed everything, multiple angles. And as they broadcast to millions watching globally, as they provided real-time testimony the government couldn't suppress, the light from the breach intensified, not gradually, suddenly, a pulse of illumination so bright it overwhelmed their cameras, visible from satellites in orbit. When the light faded, the entities were gone, not retreating, not destroyed, simply absent. The military personnel were backing away, orders coming through to fall back to secondary perimeter to increase distance. And from the breach, something was rising, not emerging rapidly, but ascending slowly, deliberately. The cameras caught glimpses, fragments of something too large to see all at once, something that existed in ways that made visual documentation difficult. Sarah noticed something else. The entities hadn't disappeared, they'd changed. Where dozens of human-shaped figures had stood, there was now something else. Formations of light, geometric patterns, structures that moved and shifted but maintained positions around the breach. They weren't guards anymore. They were coordinates, markers, showing it the way up. They were never the threat, Marcus said, understanding. They were preparation. They were making sure it could find the surface, that it wouldn't get disoriented, that it would know where to emerge. David kept filming as the thing rose higher. Parts of it were becoming visible now, though visible wasn't quite right. They could see it, but comprehending what they were seeing was different. Surfaces that reflected light in ways that hurt the eyes. Geometries that seemed to exist in more dimensions than 3. Movement that looked simultaneous instead of sequential, like watching something exist in multiple positions at once. "How big is it?" Amanda asked, checking feeds, making sure the broadcast was stable. "We're only seeing part of it," Marcus said, looking at his seismic readings. "Most of it is still underground. What's emerged so far is maybe 10% of total mass." The military perimeter was collapsing. Soldiers were falling back faster now, equipment being abandoned, personnel evacuating in vehicles. Not ordered retreat, panicked flight. Whatever protocols they'd been given hadn't prepared them for this. Sarah watched through telephoto lenses as officers tried to maintain order, as discipline broke down under the weight of seeing something that shouldn't exist. Then the thing stopped rising, just stopped, partially emerged, the rest still below ground, and for the first time it made sound. Not mechanical noise, not anything like animal vocalization. Something else, a vibration that carried across the desert, that made the ground hum, that resonated in bone and teeth and chest cavity. It felt like language, though no human language, like communication meant for something other than human ears. The light formations that had been the entities responded. They pulsed in sequence, different patterns, different rhythms, responding, confirming. The thing was talking to its advanced scouts, and they were reporting back. Sarah turned to the camera, to the millions watching. "It's communicating." The entities were sent ahead to gather information, to learn about us, and now they're telling it what they learned. It's receiving a briefing on humanity. 43 million people watching, Amanda said, monitoring the feeds. Every major network carrying it. This is going out live, unfiltered. Sarah spoke directly to the lens. "What you're seeing is real. This is not special effects, not a hoax. Something has been beneath Australia for longer than human civilization has existed, and our government has known for 70 years. They've been monitoring it, studying it, trying to contain it, and now it's awake. What happens next will affect everyone. This isn't Australia's secret anymore. This is humanity's crisis. The thing began moving again, not rising further, but spreading. Portions of it extending horizontally, reaching outward from the breach point, moving across the desert surface. Not fast, but inexorable. Wherever it touched, the ground changed. The red sand turned dark, almost black, then began to reflect light differently, like it was becoming something else. Converting, transforming, claiming. It's terraforming, Marcus said, watching the spread. Changing the environment to match whatever conditions it needs, or prefers, or remembers from before it was buried. The transformation spread in a circle around the breach, expanding steadily. 50 meters, 100, 200. The military perimeter was well beyond that range, but the circle kept growing. Sarah did quick math. At current rate of expansion, it would reach their position in approximately 4 hours. "We need to consider fallback options," David said, still filming but watching the approaching edge of transformed ground. "Not yet," Sarah said. "We stay as long as we can. As long as we're broadcasting, as long as people are watching, this can't be buried. The moment we run, the moment the feed cuts, they can control the narrative again." So they stayed. Broadcasting continuously as the thing continued its partial emergence, as it transformed the desert around the breach, as it communicated with the light formations that had been entities. They narrated what they saw, provided context, answered questions sent in by viewers through Amanda's satellite connection. They made sure the world understood this wasn't ending, it was beginning. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. The circle of transformed ground reached 1 kilometer radius. 2 kilometers. The military had established a new perimeter at 5 kilometers, but even from that distance, personnel were reporting equipment failures, communication breakdowns, psychological effects. Being near it, even at safe remove, was affecting people. At 4:32 p.m., something changed. The thing stopped spreading. The transformation ceased at exactly 2.7 kilometers radius. The light formations converged, moving from their positions around the perimeter to a central point directly above the breach. They merged, combining into a single structure, intricate and beautiful and incomprehensible. And then it spoke. Not vibration this time. Sound, words, English words, though the voice was wrong, layered, like multiple speakers in imperfect synchronization. "We acknowledge your presence. We have learned your languages. We understand your fear. We mean no extinction. We claim only what was ours. We sleep again when transformation complete. You will adapt or relocate. Coexistence is acceptable. Interference is not." The words carried across the desert, picked up by their microphones, broadcast to everyone watching. A declaration, a boundary, a warning. Sarah looked at the camera one last time. "You heard it. We all heard it. Whatever this is, whoever they are, they're not leaving. They're reclaiming territory, and they're giving us a choice: adapt or leave. But they're not asking permission." The broadcast continued for another 3 hours before government forces finally reached their position and shut it down. But by then, it didn't matter. 78 million people had watched. The footage had been downloaded, copied, distributed beyond any hope of suppression. The secret was out completely. The world knew. Sarah, Marcus, and David were detained, but not disappeared. Too many people knew where they were, what they were doing. They were taken to a facility, but this time it was official, documented, with legal representation present. The government couldn't make them vanish. They could only try to manage what came next. What came next was negotiations, not with the researchers, with the thing in the desert, with Subject Zero, with whatever ancient presence had been sleeping beneath Australia and was now awake, claiming 2.7 kilometers of territory, transforming it into something new, making it clear that humanity's time as sole custodians of the planet had ended. The researchers had documented the beginning. The rest would be history in the making, and they had ensured that this history, at least, would be recorded honestly. 6 months after the emergence, the world had settled into an uneasy new normal. The transformed zone around the breach remained stable at 2.7 kilometers radius, a perfect circle of altered landscape that defied every attempt at scientific analysis. The material that had been desert sand now registered as something else entirely, something that didn't match any known element or compound. Instruments failed when brought too close. Samples degraded within hours of removal. Photography produced images that looked different each time they were viewed, as if the transformed area refused to be consistently documented. Subject Zero had not emerged further. The portion visible above ground remained constant, perhaps 10 to 15% of its total mass. It didn't move, didn't grow, didn't spread beyond its claimed territory. It simply existed, a presence that had rewritten every assumption about what was possible. The light formations that had been entities now maintained permanent positions around the perimeter. They no longer wore human faces. In their true form, they were geometric patterns that moved through configurations too complex for human minds to fully process. They didn't communicate with anyone except Subject Zero. They were guards, or perhaps priests, tending to something vast and ancient. Sarah Mitchell, Marcus Chen, and David Reeves had become the most famous scientists on the planet. Their testimony had been analyzed by every intelligence agency, every research institution, every government committee. They'd been interviewed hundreds of times, written books, consulted with world leaders, and they were carefully watched, always, because they knew things the government still wanted to control. They lived separately now. The constant proximity they'd needed for survival had become unbearable once the immediate danger passed. They remained in contact, coordinated on public statements, but they'd each built separate lives. Sarah had returned to wildlife biology, studying how animals were adapting to the transformed zone. Marcus had joined an international research consortium, attempting to understand the physics. David continued documenting, building an archive that would exist as testimony for whatever came after. But despite the fame, despite the apparent openness, all three understood something the public didn't. The real secret wasn't Subject Zero. Subject Zero was what they'd been allowed to find. The real secret was what they were still hiding. It started with inconsistencies in the official timeline. The government claimed they'd discovered Subject Zero in 1952 when the drilling incident occurred. But Sarah had found references in Aboriginal testimonies going back to the 1800s, references to government interest in the old place, decades before any official programs existed. Marcus had found budget allocations for subterranean monitoring dating to 1923, 30 years before the supposed discovery. David had interviewed former military personnel who described operations in the desert in the 1940s, operations involving containment protocols before Subject Zero supposedly became active. The drilling in 1952 hadn't discovered Subject Zero. It had awakened it. Something had been there much longer, something the government had known about and been trying to access. The breach wasn't an accident. It was the result of decades of increasingly aggressive attempts to reach something they knew was below. But the real question was how they'd known it was there at all. Someone had told them. Someone had known. And that someone had known for a very long time. Sarah found the first piece 8 months after the emergence. A journal entry from 1788, written by an officer on the First Fleet. He described conversations with Aboriginal guides who warned against traveling into certain inland territories. The guide spoke of the singing ground, where the earth hummed with sounds that were not natural, where people who went too far became changed and could not return to their tribes. The location described corresponded almost exactly to the current transformed zone. Someone in 1788 had known, and someone had written it down. And that knowledge had been preserved, passed down, eventually landing in the hands of people who decided to investigate. Marcus found the second piece. Anomalies in magnetic field surveys from 1903, from 1891, from 1867. Someone had been measuring the area for over a century, tracking the electromagnetic pulse, documenting its frequency. The pulse wasn't new. It had been there forever, getting stronger, and someone had been watching it the entire time. David found the third piece, and it was the most disturbing. He was cataloging footage from the emergence when he noticed something in the background, visible for less than 3 seconds. A person standing at the edge of the military perimeter, not in uniform, just watching. David enhanced the image. The person was wearing civilian clothes, holding what looked like a notebook, observing the emergence with an expression not of fear, but of satisfaction. David ran the image through facial recognition. The person matched a photograph from 1964, archived in National Library records. Dr. Helena Wirth, geologist, employed by the Australian government from 1956 to 1973. She would have been 32 in that photograph. In David's footage from the emergence, she looked exactly the same, not aged well, identical, no aging at all. They met at Sarah's house to compare findings, first time together in months. They spread documents across her dining table, photographs, data printouts, timelines. When they finally looked at each other, the question didn't need to be asked aloud. The government didn't just know about Subject Zero, Sarah said quietly. They've been working with someone who's been watching it for decades, someone who doesn't age. Not just watching, Marcus added, pointing to electromagnetic data. Stimulating. Every major increase in pulse frequency corresponds with human activity. Drilling, seismic surveys, electromagnetic experiments. They were deliberately agitating it, trying to wake it up. But why would anyone want to wake something like that? David asked. Sarah pulled out the Aboriginal testimony. Because whatever it is, it changes things. It transforms. And someone decided that transformation was valuable. They spent 3 days building a timeline that stretched back over 2 centuries. The pattern was clear. Every few decades, new people would be brought into the program, contributing to the long-term project of understanding and accessing Subject Zero. And overseeing it all, appearing in records across generations, a small group of individuals who never aged. Dr. Helena Wirth was one. They found 4 others in historical records, always in background roles, always connected to the program, always looking the same across photographs spanning 50, 60, 70 years. They weren't human, or they weren't entirely human anymore. They were something else, changed. They're not trying to contain it, Marcus said. They're trying to replicate it. Whatever Subject Zero does, these people experienced it and survived it. And they've spent generations trying to understand how to control it. Immortality, David said simply. Or something close to it. That's worth any risk. They had evidence, but it was circumstantial. Photographs suggesting people weren't aging. Documents showing long-term programs. None of it was proof. They needed something more concrete. Sarah made a decision. We go back to the transformed zone. We try to make contact with Subject Zero directly, ask it what it knows about these people. They'll never let us get close, Marcus said. Official access, David corrected. But I've been mapping surveillance gaps. They planned for 2 weeks, gathered equipment, arranged logistics. They told Amanda Price what they were doing. She argued against it, but she knew them well enough to understand that stopping wasn't in their nature. She gave them updated satellite images and communication equipment. They approached the zone from the north, traveling at night across unmaintained terrain. It took 3 days to reach the edge of the transformed zone. They arrived at dawn, the sun rising over landscape that glowed with subtle luminescence. Marcus set up monitoring equipment. The boundary wasn't solid. They could cross if they chose. David activated his cameras. Sarah checked her notes one last time. Then she looked at the others. Ready? They stepped across the boundary. The transition was immediate and disorienting. The surface felt solid but looked uncertain, like walking on frozen light. The air felt thicker, textured. Sound behaved strangely, echoes from wrong directions. They walked toward the center, toward the breach. The light formations noticed them, turned attention toward the 3 humans, but didn't attack, just observed. Sarah stopped 50 meters from the breach and spoke. We need to talk. We need to understand what's really happening, what you are, what the people who've been watching you for generations want. For a long moment, nothing. Then the voice, layered and multiple. You know already. You have discovered the changed ones. Those who touched us before we fully slept, who were transformed by contact, who have spent generations trying to replicate what happened to them. Did you change them deliberately? Sarah asked. No, they changed themselves. They found us when we were vulnerable, transitioning to dormancy. They touched the boundary between what we are and what you are. Some died, some survived. Those who survived became something between, no longer fully human, not what we are, intermediate, incomplete. They've been trying to complete the transformation, Marcus said. That's why they've been studying you, provoking you. They think if you're fully active, they can finish what was started. Correct. They seek transformation. They believe we are the path. They are wrong. What we are cannot be achieved by your species. The biology is incompatible. They have extended their lives, but they cannot complete the change. They will exist in between state until they die, which will be long time. How long have they been trying? David asked. Since we began to sleep, approximately 65,000 of your years. Current group has maintained continuous knowledge for approximately 4,000 years. They are persistent. The numbers were staggering. 65,000 years, 4,000 years of continuous study. What do you want from us? Sarah asked. Why communicate at all? Because they will not stop. They will continue to provoke, to attempt transformation. They will eventually attempt something catastrophic. We emerged now to establish boundary, to make clear what is ours, what is yours, to demonstrate that we are not resource to be exploited. We are presence to be respected. And if we don't respect that boundary, Marcus asked, then we expand it. We have claimed 2.7 kilometers. We can claim more. We can claim all. We prefer coexistence, but we will not tolerate continued interference. The changed ones must cease their attempts, or we will cease them. It was a warning, clear, direct, impossible to misinterpret. We'll tell people, Sarah said. We'll expose what the changed ones have been doing. That is why we spoke to you. You are witnesses. You have proven willing to speak truth, regardless of consequences. Tell your species what you have learned. The fence is not to keep us in. It is to keep them out, to protect us from their desperation. The conversation was over. The attention withdrew. Sarah, Marcus, and David walked back toward the boundary, toward the world they'd have to convince. They crossed back over without incident. They were never the threat. They were the messengers. It took them 2 days to get back to civilization. They released everything. The photographs of unchanged individuals across decades, the timeline showing deliberate provocation, the recording of their conversation. They provided evidence that the government had been infiltrated by something not quite human, that policy had been shaped by individuals with their own agenda. The response was predictable: official denials, claims of fabrication. But there was also belief spreading through populations tired of being lied to. Protests erupted, larger this time, demanding investigation of the changed ones, demanding transparency. And in secure facilities around the world, people who hadn't aged in decades, who'd spent lifetimes pursuing transformation, those people watched the exposure and made calculations. Some decided to disappear. Others decided to accelerate, to make one final attempt. 6 weeks later, a team attempted to breach the transform zone with equipment designed to extract samples, to force contact. They were led by people who looked 30, but were much older. Subject Zero's response was immediate. The transform zone expanded, not gradually, instantly, from 2.7 kilometers to 50 kilometers in less than an hour. Everything within that radius was converted, changed, claimed. The team attempting the breach was caught in the expansion. They weren't killed. They were transformed, fully this time. They became something like the light formations, geometric and beautiful, and no longer human at all. They got what they wanted. But what they became wasn't immortal humans. It was something that served Subject Zero's purposes, not their own. The expansion stopped at exactly 50 kilometers. Subject Zero made another announcement. This is final boundary. We will not expand further unless provoked. We have demonstrated capability. We have shown consequence. Coexistence requires respect. Interference brings transformation. Choose. Humanity chose, or most of it did. The changed ones who remained went underground. Their influence diminished. Their programs were investigated and shut down. It would take decades to fully root them out, but their control was broken. Sarah, Marcus, and David met one last time at Sarah's house, 6 months after the expansion, 1 year after the initial emergence. They sat in her backyard, drinking coffee, trying to remember what life had been like before. "Do you think it's over?" David asked. "No," Sarah said. Subject Zero is permanent. The transformed zone is permanent. The changed ones are still out there. This is just the new normal. "I still count," Marcus admitted. "Every hour. Make sure there's still 3 of us. Make sure the shadows point the right direction." "I still draw the symbol," Sarah said. "Not 600 times a day anymore, but I draw it." David held up his camera. "I still record everything, even when the battery's dead." They sat in silence. Then Sarah raised her coffee cup. To Richardson, he found the entrance. He paid the price. He deserves to be remembered. They toasted their lost colleague, the fourth member who'd been transformed, who'd served purposes they'd only begun to understand. The fence remained, both fences. And now a third boundary, 50 kilometers of transformed ground. A permanent reminder that humanity shared the planet with things older and more powerful than itself. Subject Zero slept again, or meditated, or existed in whatever state it preferred. The light formations maintained their vigil. The desert had been changed forever, and 3 people who'd been ordinary researchers had become witnesses to the moment everything changed. They finished their coffee, made plans to meet in a few months, went their separate ways, back to separate lives, carrying separate pieces of a story too large for any one person to hold. The world continued, adapted. Tourists visited the perimeter, took photographs. Scientists studied from safe distances. Governments established protocols. Sarah Mitchell sat in her house that night, drawing the symbol one more time in her notebook. They hadn't discovered Subject Zero. They'd simply been allowed to see it, been chosen to witness, been selected to carry the message back to a species that needed to learn its place. The longest fence on Earth wasn't keeping anything out. It was showing humanity the edges of its territory, the limits of its dominion. And on the other side of that boundary, patient and ancient and utterly alien, Subject Zero waited, watching, wondering what humanity would do next, whether it would learn, whether it would respect the fence. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And Sarah, Marcus, and David would spend the rest of their lives knowing they'd witnessed not an ending, but a transition. From the age when humanity believed it ruled the earth, to the age when it learned it was only visiting. The fence kept standing. The boundary held. Humanity was finally starting to listen.